Hello everyone, my name is Charlene Kirby, and I chose this song as an introduction because it reminded me of the ethical approach of deontology, and we will discuss the ethical approach later in our presentation. Thank you. Some of you may question whether addiction is an epidemic in our country. Let's look at the definition of epidemic. According to Webster, an epidemic is a widespread occurrence of an infectious disease in a community at a particular time. We will probably agree with the terms that Webster describes as widespread, rampant, outbreak, extensive, and wide range. The impact of drug abuse affects all ethnic groups, cultures, social status, and their families. The repercussions of addiction affects our country financially in the realm of healthcare costs as well as judicial costs. The current Surgeon General, Dr. Murphy, waged a mission against substance abuse in the United States when he assumed office as Surgeon General. Some of his colleagues from his prior employer urged him to do something about the addiction crisis in America. As the first ever Surgeon General to report on this important topic, this report aimed to shift the way our society thought about substance misuse and substance abuse disorder, while defining actions we can take to prevent and to treat these conditions. Statistics. They show 6 million citizens that are addicted to prescribed drugs. 1 out of 10 of them receive treatment. 20.8 million people are affected by addiction to substance abuse, including binge drinking. That means that more lives are affected by alcohol and drug abuse in our country than cancer and diabetes. And in combination of healthcare expenses, criminal justice costs, social welfare consequences, and an unproductive workplace, our country spends $400 billion annually on addiction. I think at this time we will all agree that addiction is definitely widespread. It can definitely be considered an epidemic dilemma in our country. And it does affect our family members, our colleagues, our authority figures such as religious leaders, and also the criminal justice and healthcare systems. What are we planning to do about this epidemic in our country, you ask? Well, change can only come once we acknowledge that addiction to substance abuse is a disease and that it has a physiological impact on the body. It does affect the neurotransmitters over time, reducing everyday pleasures, causing individuals to desire to have more of the abuse substance that they are misusing. Therefore, programs must be developed and policies to prevent the future generations from becoming addicted to substance abuse. And interventions must be developed to manage and to treat those who are ready for treatment. And a support group in the community must be developed in order to assist those who are affected by this terrible disease to a path of wellness. And the systematic effects will be reduced healthcare costs and legal fees. The individual experiencing addiction may argue the principle of autonomy. Autonomy is the right to act in a self determining manner. Therefore, their platform may be based on the fact that they and only they can make a decision in reference to their health and their wellness. Which brings us to the principles of slippery slope. Everyone is entitled to autonomy, but it could be considered unethical to allow a person to pursue a decision that may result in self destruction. A slippery slope situation is when a morally unacceptable event is being discussed that could lead toward a morally unethical result. Consider all the various areas of impact discussed earlier. In review of the principles of slippery slope, I believe we will both agree that this is relevant. Often loved ones operate from an approach of paternalism. This principle is when they override the wishes of the individual affected for a more optimal choice. Historically, many of us have seen people who have relapsed repeatedly. The use of paternalism could be one of the reasons because the patient was forced and did not act on their own will to receive treatment. Dr. Murphy referenced a prior Surgeon General that posed a war on tobacco a few decades ago, when he spoke about his mission to prevent addiction. Our current Surgeon General, Dr. Murphy, view could come from the principle of communitarian ethics. Communitarian ethics is focused on community goals and moral relationships in any community or population rather than the care of one individual. Addiction is a disease that affects individuals in many areas of their lives and impacts those connected to them. My personal view is deontology. Deontology is doing what is right, dutiful, and establishing rules and regulations for all to follow. This does not leave room for individuals to make choices of their own. There's a right way to do things and there's a wrong way to do things. There may be some that will be lost with this method because they are not willing or ready for change. Therefore, our main focus must be on prevention and education to minimize the number of people enslaved to addiction moving forward. The focus is to help those that are ready for help and support. Holistic nursing is defined as the basic underlying concept of unity and integral wholeness of all people and of all nature, which is identified and pursued by finding unity and wholeness within oneself and within humanity. This is applicable to addiction because addiction affects the individual as well as the community surrounding the individual. Therefore, holistic nursing is an approach that must be considered when dealing with this epidemic. The Christian nurse perspective. The Christian nurse must hold herself or himself accountable for their actions and care for the individuals coping with addictions in a non-judgmental way. When goals of recovery are unmet, the Christian nurse is faced with frustration and brokenness at times. And it's at these times that they must realize that everything is in the sovereign God's hands, and in God we trust.
Don't you know you're not the only one suffering?